So, hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series, we talk all things cloud with experts and advocates from right across our industry, covering a wide variety of topics from skills and careers through to technical overviews and soft skills. So whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It's really appreciated. Please do take part in the chat below. Drop us a comment, a like, and if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be absolutely awesome. Okay, so my next guest is a cloud automator at Crayon currently. He's a Microsoft Azure MVP, a HashiCorp ambassador, and a cloud native developer, as well as being a superb community leader and contributor. So based in Oslo, Norway, I'm thrilled to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With as Mr. Roberth Strand. Hey, Robert, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. This is great.
No, absolutely. No, thanks. Like I say, thanks for agreeing to come on and doing one of these In Conversation With episodes. Look, I know we've met before briefly. We did a video which came out a few weeks ago, depending on when you're watching this, but with the Azure Cloud Native User Group, which of course you're a co-organizer of, and that's going from strength to strength at the moment. I thought it'd be a great idea to get you on and talk to you and, you know, understand your kind of career history and where you've come from and what you're up to at the moment in this wonderful world of cloud. So I know we've got a couple of good topic areas to speak about on this episode. Look, let's get into it, Robert. I mean, do you want to kick things off with a bit more of a broader intro to yourself and, you know, a bit of a potted career history? That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, my name is Roberth Strand. I still don't know if I'm supposed to pronounce my last name in Norwegian or English because it means something in English, which it doesn't in Norwegian. So
Okay.
I'm based out of Oslo, Norway, but I'm actually from a relatively small town, not in Norwegian scale, but at least in world scale, from a town called Tromsø, which is above the Arctic circles. So it's
Okay.
69 degrees north, if you need to know. So it's pretty far up there.
Right.
Moved on to Oslo, obviously, because of work, because this is the capital. This is where things are happening. I've been working in IT for, I actually have to think, 8 years now, which is not really that long, and you know, based on what everyone else has been doing. But I just turned 35 years old, so you know, I started pretty late because of many reasons. But I'm currently working as the head of platform engineering at Crayon, or like the Crayon Group, so the main company that have, for instance, like the Crayon Norway, Finland. Basically, we're everywhere in the world. So far from, you know, one side of the United States to the far easts, we have offices all over the world and do a lot of things.
Yeah, well, let's talk about a few of those things then, because I know, you know, obviously we've spoken before around that kind of topic area of cloud native. But I mean, what's your own kind of journey been into the industry, and you know, how did you kind of get to this point now where you're working with these technologies, Robert?
Yeah, so I guess I have a little bit of weird journey because before, so growing up, I basically haven't done good in school. I had a lot of issues with like the normal Norwegian school system, and I usually refer to you know, one size fits none, and that's basically what I thought about school as well. I had teachers who, when I did bad, they kind of just went like, "You probably should study more." I was like, "Well, that's not how it works for me." Because of that, I never actually got an education. Or I'm lucky to live in Norway, where even if you're unemployed, you basically get money from the States. So you know, you're pretty much well taken care of. And I went through the normal like public school things, and when we come to high school, I did a couple of years and kind of finished them, but never passed all the classes. So I didn't graduate in that sense, and then never went to university. So I spent 10 years playing in a metal band. Also known as being unemployed and living off the government.
I'm with you, Robert. Yeah, I spent my time doing that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
So yeah, when you don't really have anything to do, and you kind of, and that actually became kind of like a job for me. Like practice 3 times a week. We recorded an album. We went on tour and everything like that. We never made any money because you don't when you're a musician unless you actually break through like real. So at some point I kind of just sat down and went like, this is not going anywhere. I can't just live off of what now seems like I have no clue how I actually made it through those years when I look at whatever I made back then, and figured out I probably should have a career. And this computer things I've always been good at. I got my first computer when I was 9. I started building computers when I was like 10. At first installation of Linux, age 13. Something like that. So that kind of has always been there, and everyone said like, you should go do computer stuff because you're kind of good at that. And for some reason I thought that if I liked it I shouldn't work with it, so I never pursued that as a thing. But at some point it's like, I can't be unemployed forever. That actually doesn't work. It's like you can go through a lot and make it work, but being unemployed is not one of them. So since I'm, again, like I said to you, I feel that I'm really lucky because it's hard to get into the industry. It's really easy to be in the industry as soon as you get in there, but if you don't have anything to back up like that initial contact, especially before, it's better now. You basically don't get your foot in the door. But I more or less just put out on Facebook, like, do people know of companies in Tromsø then that do I have no clue what I asked for. If it's like IT operations and general IT stuff, is there IT companies that could take me on? Because the state I can actually work somewhere, and the government would actually pay the company to have me, as well as pay me my already money, so I could basically work for free. And an acquaintance of mine was a CEO of a really small company. So it was a CEO and a CTO, an apprentice, and that's it. And then I became the fourth, who they didn't pay. But I was really lucky because I knew the guy who kind of could just say, all right, sure, come. I know who you are. So like person-wise, it's perfectly fine. And obviously IT things you learn. And you probably will be able to learn that. And the CTO was actually, at that time, been working as a MCT for like 20 years.
Okay, yeah.
So he really knew how to teach Microsoft skills. And that was kind of like the kickoff. So it took, I think, two or 4 weeks before I went from being like the first line of support to being like second line, because I already like caught up at that level. And I worked for 2 years there, and then I went on to work for the municipality in Tromsø on contract at some point. So I then started actually making money. They couldn't hire me because I didn't have formal education.
Right, okay.
Even though I kind of run a lot of things there at that point. So I felt like consultancy, consultant work. Got my first certification, Office 365. Got offered a job straight away at a Norwegian company, and a big Norwegian company, and straight away got right back out in contract work for the municipality, doing exactly the same thing, just getting a lot more paid. And that's kind of like when the balls started rolling for real.
I mean, there's a load of things to unpack there, Robert. I think let's go back. I mean, it's a fan. At a high level, what you've just described there is you kind of made this work for yourself. At the end of the day, I mean, I can completely empathise with the whole playing in a band situation, because look, I did the same thing, and I have done the same thing, and I do still play now and again. But I know what you mean by that it's a passion, and it's really, I find it really fascinating when you seem to find that there are a lot of musicians and a lot of creative types that work in the tech industry.
Yeah.
And I've thought about this quite a lot, because when people say they play instruments or they play in bands, you kind of have to have that creative side, I feel, when it comes to solving IT problems or solving business problems, because you kind of have to be able to visualize what it is that you're trying to do. So that's firstly, that was a cool thing. And I don't know whether my calculations were correct, Robert, but did you say you're 35 at the moment and you started in IT about 8 years ago?
Yeah.
So it's very rock and roll what you did there. So you actually had the rock and roll age of death of 27. You've heard of that, yeah, I assume. So it was very much a rock and roll age of death at 27. You moved from the kind of the music career that you were trying to pursue into tech, and to get your first job with like you say, no formal education, was just put it out there, ask people, and that's fundamentally what you did, and that's how you got your start into tech and work your way through. I mean, what's your view on people, landing? Because, clearly we've got a massive skill shortage at the moment across tech generally. What's your view of people getting into the industry? Is it, I mean, clearly for you, it wasn't about the certifications and degrees and things like that, which, I mean, I got my views on, but they seem to be rightfully, kind of lowering the barriers a lot of places. But what's your take on that at the moment, Robert?
So as someone who didn't have education to like lean on, and for instance, like they work at the municipality, it's like the first thing that kind of hit me when like I was on contract, they could do that, and they could only do that for like 3 months at a time, so I had to renew over and over again, and I obviously needed people, and they had like a problem, like they had my position. They wanted to put it out there and have me apply to it, but they knew I wouldn't get it because it was actually it said higher education. Like they couldn't go away from that. And at that time I was like, but if I work for a couple of years and then take certifications that kind of prove that, that journey, how is that different from doing a bachelor's degree? But it's actually the same like amount of time, more or less, as a bachelor's degree, but you actually end up with a skill that is vital to the job, while looking at bachelor's degrees at least in Norway, and there's a little bit difference depending on where you are and what school you look at and stuff like that. Most of them don't really teach you anything that's actually vital to the things that we do. Part of like we have a university in my town, and part of the bachelor's degree in information technology there is how does an operating system work? That's like one of the, it's like from the bottom up. It's the information that I don't need to know. I need to know how to use it. I need to know how to set up servers, and I need to utilize the operating system. I don't need to know how to build it. Like that doesn't make sense. Those two things doesn't apply in mine. And what is better, me knowing that and knowing like some random facts about computer science back and forth, or actually having the skills that are, for instance, when I started, it was a lot of Office 365. I actually was certified in Office 365, and I knew how that worked. Even the people who have been, doing Exchange Server for 20-something years didn't understand Exchange. They understood how to operate it, but as soon as something went bad, they went like, we don't know. We need to then get consultants in to fix this. And I'm like, no, but it's obviously the DAGs. We need to set up and get core and everything like that. And they didn't understand that, because I came fresh out and just went like, I need to deep dive into everything because I'm so late to the game.
It's such a wonderful position that we're in to a certain extent, but I think, to pick you up on your points about that education, that higher education, I think, generally, I think I'm of the same view that you kind of alluded to, the fact that the education system is there. Whether it's keeping up with current times is, clearly it's not. Clearly the formal education, the higher education degrees, those modules and courses, they do seem to be very high level, very, generic and generalist. And, don't get me wrong, you do, you do learn, computer science, do programming concepts and things like that, they are useful. But I think I've thought about this long and hard, because I actually, I did a degree whilst I was working, purely because at the time when I was of that age, it was the thing, as you've already alluded to, you needed that kind of degree to get on in the industry. And I had exactly the same view as you. It's like, well, I know I could get that degree, but, should I not just spend my time working in a particular area? And I think back then when I did it, was a case of, well, you just have to kind of toe the line, because that's what it is. You can stand on your soapbox and say how much you don't like it, which I think a lot of people have. But I think the one thing I always say that I picked up from that formal education, which is very pertinent to what you're talking about, is it taught me how to learn, I think, is the key thing for me. And I think, what's your take on that, Robert? I mean, in terms of the industry today and how we progress as consultants and architects, clearly there's a lot to learn, right? I mean, how do you cope with that kind of massive learning curve that we seem to be always chasing?
So I kind of get that, like at one, like in one sense of the like. I held a workshop yesterday on some technical things, and people started asking me, like, all right, cool. Now you've gone through this. Where can we go to learn more? Like, what are this was on Kubernetes mainly. Like, what are like Udemy courses, or what kind of books have you read and things to learn Kubernetes? I'm like, I didn't. I went to kubernetes.io and went to the documentation and I started reading and I started building Kubernetes clusters. That's it. That's how I learn. So I get that kind of like, I see, and now I kind of understand also that a lot of people need that like instructor way of getting knowledge. They need someone to just point out, like, this is the direction you're supposed to go. These are some of the key concepts, and now you can build on that. I think that might be why I haven't been successful in school in general, because if someone is standing several hours in front of me talking, I can't concentrate on that. And my mind started wandering to a lot of other things, mainly music. Like I mentioned before we started, like last year I got diagnosed with ADHD. Which is pretty late. It's like 34, and it's like, oh, by the way, you have ADHD.
Wow. Okay.
No one. It's my current partner, my current girlfriend, who kind of started talking about, like, have you been diagnosed? Like, have someone asked you, like, is that a thing that have you gone through that when you were a kid? And I was like, no one has ever mentioned to me ADHD. That's not something people look at me and go like, oh yeah, you got ADHD. Because I don't have, well, I do sometimes, obviously, but I don't have that like hyperactive, like external thing. I do a lot of drumming, like on stuff.
Yeah.
But I know people, like everyone that I played in the band with did that, because that's what you do. Like, you can kind of like think of a song and go, all right, cool, that's a thing, and you kind of do like that. And that doesn't look like ADHD for many people, but it's not before I start talking about the fact that, for instance, if it's completely quiet, I could probably hear 10 songs at the same time in my head.
Wow. Okay. So, I was going to ask you, Robert, because obviously when you mentioned that, I said back to you, wasn't it, that my knowledge of what ADHD is and how that impacts individuals is very limited. So, I mean, talk me through how does, being diagnosed and how, working with ADHD, how does it affect you on a day-to-day? So you're saying if it's completely quiet, I'm just trying to understand what that might be like for me, what kind of things and how does it impact you?
So ADHD has a lot of different elements to it, and you might have a lot of some and not that much of some of the other ones. And there's everything from something called emotional dysfunctionality. I think that's basically what it's called. Where, for instance, something makes you mad, but instead of going like, oh, that made me mad, you actually go like, I'm furious.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people with ADHD that are in prison. And that emotional dysfunctionality is a part of that, because it's like people say, well, I just can't control myself. That could basically be ADHD. Some of these people are in prison. If they start like got that diagnosis and maybe even started on medicine, they might not have been criminals.
Got you. Yeah.
So for me, it's like, that's always been a thing. I've been furious when I was younger. And obviously it's the same thing, like with like if you get sad, instead of going like, oh, that kind of, I'm feeling kind of a bit like down, you kind of go like, everything's crap, like you completely like destroyed, full on depression all of a sudden. So you have those parts, and then you have Obviously, the hyperactive thing, which is what most people go, all right, this person have ADHD. That's just how it is. But you have stuff like being impulsive. Like
Right.
I've had money problems. A lot of people have had money problems, and many also have ADHD
Okay.
because that impulsive thing, which is kind of gets triggered. But then you have something called hyperfocus, which is kind of the opposite of what people think ADHD is. And that's actually a potential thing that you can have. For me, that happens to be stuff like music. So I mainly play guitar, but like I usually say, if it makes a sound, I probably can play it. So I can play any rhythm instrument and every string instrument, and a lot of some flutes and stuff like that. Not really, but as long as I can like get the note and kind of get how the scales work, I can play something at least. And when you start talking to me about film and movies and like nerd culture, I can mention names, I can mention dates even sometimes, but I can't remember what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
In many cases. So like you have that like hyperness if there's something that you kind of like pin your interest on, and IT has been that for me.
I was going to say, Robert, obviously you're describing some of those kind of, I guess, are they called mannerisms or what would they be?
Attributes
of somebody with it, and I guess a person with ADHD may show some but not all, and different and things like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And and I guess, like you say, when you're working in an industry like IT, where, look, let's face it, I think a lot of the time, if you need to learn and go deep dive, you really need that focus time. Is that what you're saying, that almost the work that you do now and the stuff that you're learning about is kind of playing into some of these attributes that you may have with being diagnosed with ADHD?
Sometimes I can't let go of certain things. Like I don't understand this part, and then I'll sit and stare in documentation and look at through videos and everything like that, and do exercises and labs and stuff like that to like deeply understand what is going on, because I need to know. Like I need to know every single aspect of this, and things like that is like part of like ADHD, which again seems is like the opposite of what people think. People think people that can't concentrate, which I can't in many cases, and people think people who are hyperactive, which I can be sometimes, depending. But they never like think of the hyper focus, and there's a lot of and creativity is also like attributes. So you have people like Frank Zappa, for instance. He like classic ADHD. You have all these like big forces in music, forces in creativity and art that have ADHD, and it also kind of seems like there's a lot of people in IT who has that, and maybe not as something that they know, but as soon as they're talking with it, I can go, that actually sounds like me. Like that's also a thing that I do.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
No, and I'm sure there'll be people, because certainly the things that you described, I could turn around and go, wow, okay, yeah, I do that, and I've done this, and I guess it's that fine line, isn't it? And look, I'm certainly no expert in mental health or conditions of the mind as such, and how they impact and what how, I mean, to be diagnosed with something like ADHD, clearly you've gone through a process to understand, and I guess it's one of those things, because we mentioned this briefly off camera, that these subjects have been kind of taboo subjects that people don't necessarily want to talk about, but I think I find them fascinating from a point of view of everything that we approach, we should approach him with that kind of assume a positive intent. So I certainly don't speak to anybody with a viewpoint of a negative connotation. I'm not looking to ask questions to use that. I'm looking to ask questions with that positive intent. Okay, wow. So you've been diagnosed with ADHD. How does what's that mean for you? How does that affect you in your career? So, and you speaking about that, hopefully then is helping others realize, well, actually, we can all be more tolerant. We can all be more mindful and empathetic towards,
Yeah.
how we're all working. have you hit any obstacles, Robert, with that in your tech career, or generally with, since you were diagnosed? I appreciate it's only been a year, but I guess, looking back in hindsight before you
Yeah.
were diagnosed, have there been any kind of barriers or hurdles you've had to overcome?
And it's actually the hindsight, which is like the best part of it, because as soon as I had like this, like now I have a reason. Now I understand why I've been having these problems, or like I understand better how I work. But obviously things like concentrating on a task. What I usually say about ADHD is it's totally normal feelings, and it's totally normal behavior for folks, most people. But it is a chemical imbalance in your brain, which makes things like, all right, you got a boring task. Like you would say, oh crap, this is boring. Well, let's just power through it. Like some of those things, I can't. Like I literally can't. My brain start doing everything other than trying to get this done. Even if I know it's like 5 minutes and it's gone and I'm finished with it. And that can be a lot of things. So stuff like that. Just the concentration part obviously is a factor. And since I do a lot of internalizing, it seems, and maybe also why people haven't picked up on like the ADHD. I growing up, I haven't been like really out there and spoken. I'm an introvert. I kept for myself a lot of the times. Sometimes I have like this brilliant idea of how stuff works, and I'm totally on, like this is perfect. Nothing. This is exactly how we should do this. And then I actually start talking to people about it, and then kind of, no wait, no, that's completely wrong. The things that I've been thinking are because I can just get like single-mindedly going in a direction, and I, even if I read something, it's like, no, but that doesn't affect. But as soon as I start talking to other people and get other inputs, I kind of like get in line. I think a lot of people have that in general, but I can go like completely out. Like this is like the perfect setup, and then it turns out no, it's actually totally wrong. Because I kind of like, again, the hyper focus kind of working against me. Usually it's a thing where I can deep dive into something and learn a lot about it, and get really, really good technical on things. But sometimes when it's like architecture, that is an implementation method. Basically everything is correct unless otherwise stated. And sometimes I can go really off the far end there, and it's not until I start actually vocalizing and talking to people about it, I kind of go, wait, this is actually not a good idea at all.
Yeah,
we shouldn't do this. I know I said we should do this, but no, we shouldn't do this at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way that you frame that, the way that you talk about, you say you internalize a problem, you come up with this idea, and you think, right, that's the perfect answer, and then somebody goes, actually, no, and then you kind of have a moment of reflection, I presume, and go, okay, right, I took it down that road. Maybe that's down to ADHD, the hyperfocus, taking it down. But I guess being diagnosed then gives you that moment of realization to a point.
Yeah.
Going, okay, and I mean, how does that make you feel, Robert? Is that kind of, oh damn, or is it right? Okay, but I've learned something from that anyway because you kind of focus so deeply on a particular area.
I think it's before it was a snowball effect, right? It was one of the reasons why I didn't, weren't very social and stuff like that, because I could be like told like this is a perfect thing. This like I have the answer, and then I get challenged and I realize how stupid I am, and since again the emotional dysfunctionality, I kind of go like totally depressed or really mad. So it's like these all these aspects of ADHD kind of come into play, and after getting the diagnosis and learning about these things and knowing that this is perfectly normal things for people to have, except that I can't really control it because my brain happens to be unbalanced on these things. Then there are certain parts where I kind of go like, all right, I have an idea, but I think I need to talk it out. And it actually is not usually people saying to me, probably we should look at this. sometimes it's just me telling someone about an idea, and then I realize, no, that's not how we're supposed to do it. I thought it was, but as soon as I start talking about it, I realize that is not the right way. And after learning more about me, I still feel some of these things, and obviously imposter syndrome is a thing that everyone feels,
Sure.
gripping on, which could be devastating if you don't have your emotions in control. But because of the diagnosis, and also because I started on medicine and things like that, I can control that more, and I understand that this is just the ADHD. This is not like a reason to be sad or upset. It's just my ADHD is pushing it that way.
Absolutely. I mean, even now, obviously just being able to be so open about these kind of topics, I think is a massive strength in itself, and we seem to be going down the right track. That, like I look back to my point earlier, is that, look, we all want, I mean, the vast majority of people want the best from anybody they speak to, friendly, positive intent, understanding. And I was going to pick you up and say, with people that may have been diagnosed with a condition like ADHD, I mean, what's your take on others around you? So in a community, in a workplace or a business, are there ways that you feel people should either educate themselves on, or react or act in a certain way, or be mindful of when you're dealing with people that have been diagnosed with something like ADHD? Have you got a take on that? And what do you think people should be thinking about and be mindful of?
I definitely think people, when if you're working with other people, you probably should understand if they have something like ADHD or something like Asperger's, or something that would make you, if you don't think about it, different. It's the other guy in the room sitting there, kind of like tapping his feet, and you kind of go, "God, that's really annoying. I hate that guy for being like, why doesn't he consider like the other people?" Like if you are open about stuff like ADHD, it seems like most people kind of go, "All right, that's the ADHD," and then it's okay. It's like a baby crying, it's a baby, you can't go like, "Baby, stop." All right.
Yeah.
And the baby go, "All right, cool, I'll stop." It's a baby, so there's something there that actually explains the behavior, and you don't blame the parent for having a crying baby, because how can you control that? And it's the same with stuff like ADHD. And I met someone with Asperger's, and everyone around me before I met him, by the way, he has Asperger's, just so you know. Like, he can say some weird stuff, but he actually came up and introduced and said, "Hey, my name is so-and-so, and I got Asperger's. So if I say something that you find offensive, I don't actually mean it. So just tell me." It's like straight off, like the first interaction. And that kind of makes it better, because if you don't know that, and people start acting what you kind of find weird or rude or something like that, you start like forming your thoughts about like how they are as persons, and that might not be
the case at all. It's and that's what I mean. It's great in that sense that now today in society generally, we can speak about these things without that kind of like you say, people, whatever people deem as normal. I don't think there is such thing as a normal thing anyway, but you're right, there are people that will think, "Oh, well," like you say, "that's a bit strange," or "that's a bit weird," and think ill of people, or think negatively about people, which absolutely shouldn't be the case. And I think it's great that we can have this chat now, even educating me. Like I say, I knew very little about ADHD, and having this conversation is making me feel, well, I need to find out a little bit more, and understand how I can be to make sure that I'm acting appropriately around people that are different to me, and I think it's that whole ethos of tolerating other people's behaviors, being respectful and being empathetic towards that, and doing it from a positive standpoint, and certainly not a negative one. But I mean, look, thank you for being so open and candid, to be honest, Robert. I think that's going to hopefully help more people as they watch this realize that, look, we all have issues and challenges in our own daily lives that undoubtedly we don't necessarily want to broadcast to the world, but things like this are massively important topics, especially when it comes to working and speaking and dealing with people and just being social in the workplace or whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, thank you for speaking about that, Robert.
And it's one of those things that I don't understand why people. I'm very open in general about a lot of things, and I don't really understand how people. And it might just be like from my point of view, because again, I don't want to jump to conclusions on anything. So for me, like being totally open about some of these things just makes sense to me, because it helps me instead of like if we had this conversation and you started harping on something that kind of bugged me, and you know, instead of some of these things come from the ADHD, some of these things might explain a lot about my behavior to you. I rather just get that out there and talk about it, because it's part of who I am apparently. Like I can't really do anything about it. That's how I was born.
Yeah, but I mean, even if it were the ADHD, you know, doing that, it's almost like, you know, from my perspective in life and how I like to speak with people is very much, I think that's a great way of being anyway, in general, regardless if it's, you know, I think being open and honest and down the line and, like I say, not deliberately going out your way to insult people because you know it'll undermine them or cause them, you know, offense. You don't do things in a deliberate manner. You do things from that position of you're trying to be helpful, you're trying to be positive, you're trying, you know, and I know there's the fine line, and that's the thing then, isn't it, is that you meet different personalities, and even then when you meet different personalities, you still keep that same view. So like you say, you know, it's fascinating how you say you can't help being this particular way because, you know, it's kind of the way that you work. But then I think of that and I think, well, that's not a bad way to be anyway, surely, you know, that's, you know, so it's a fascinating topic area, Robert. It really is. And like I say, I'm not professing to be anything other than a bystander listening to you telling me, you know, what that's meant for you. And look, clearly it served you well. Clearly you're doing well in your career. You're working on some fantastic things at the moment. Can we switch tracks slightly and just maybe talk a little bit around cloud native and, you know, kind of, maybe just give me that general overview. I know we've got another video where we talk with the Azure Cloud Native group where we talked a little bit around cloud native, but give us your view on cloud native and what that means. You know, it's a big, broad thing, I know, but what does that mean for the industry today, Robert?
It's a big broad thing, and obviously it's a little bit confusing term as well, because and we see that with the Azure Cloud Native user group, like the CFP on Sessionize, people are sending in stuff that is cloud, but not cloud native. Like the term, obviously, cloud native, you know, it sounds like something that's native to the cloud, but then you're going to go, what is the cloud? So the clouds are things like self-service, it's API, it's declaratively defining something. So I think the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, they have stuff like API, immutable infrastructure, so for me it's like that new modern approach to software and software development and operating. So for instance, you could use a tool that's really old, for instance, like Linux, and you could do cloud native things with it. So it's not necessarily the tools that are cloud native in itself, it's how you use them. And that's the same with cloud. Like the cloud is basically just data centers, but it's delivered in such a fashion where you have the networking and the infrastructure and everything like that is provided to you, and you can basically just order and scale up and scale down. That's cloud. Cloud native is kind of like the next step on top of that again. It's when we start like digging deep into both infrastructure and application development and say, this is how we want it to be. We want it to be declarative. We want to create APIs to talk between different things. We want it to run in small packages, which you don't treat as pets, which is like the famous thing, not cattle, not pets. as soon as the application, if there's a new version, you don't try to make that the new version. You just put up the new version on the side and then just delete the old one. That, all those kind of things are cloud native. So there's the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. They are a foundation which hosts a myriad of working groups and what they call tags, technical advisory groups, who works with all these different projects. One of the projects is obviously Kubernetes. And most of the things that are there are some sort of like tooling that probably involves Kubernetes or against containers or things like anything where you can define something declaratively. So it could be some sort of coding solution or framework. There's frameworks, among other things like Open GitOps, which I'm a part of, where we try to define the term GitOps and make that accessible to people, because again, it's using words that people think they know what it means, but it actually is an operating model. So that's basic cloud native. It's really hard to like summarize it really quickly, because
no, I do appreciate that, and I thought I'd throw that in there really, because I think for people watching this, and for somebody like yourself that's been working in that part of the industry for a fair amount of time now, and you're kind of helping form some of these things, and it's probably fair to say that the future isn't yet written. It's probably fair in saying, and this is where I guess a lot of the confusion is coming into play.
So for instance, like going into a portal and saying +1 virtual machine, that's cloud, right?
Yeah.
Cloud native is writing code that you execute, and you say, I want a machine. It should look like this, and it should be located here, and then it does that for you, right? So it's I usually reference like abstraction layers. Something is always an abstraction layer of something else. And we are kind of just like continuously developing these thoughts and ideas, and the container idea is not a new idea. The container idea stems back from like the 70s. So it's not new. Storing things in Git when you're an operation person and not a developer is not a new idea, but at a certain point, we get to the point where the technology kind of can fulfill the things that we want. We have like this idea of where we want to go, but it's not always possible. That's why we went to virtual machines at some points, and after that, we have Docker kind of popularized containers, even though they existed before that, and we're always like moving in a direction where we kind of get to a point where you have an abstraction layer on top of something, and you make it easier to work with as a whole. But obviously, then someone needs to take care of the stack beneath.
Well, this is the thing, and I guess, like as an observer, as somebody that I would put myself in the camp of I roughly know from a high level cloud native concepts and terminologies, and the scenarios that you may want to use certain technologies to solve certain types of problems, but clearly there's a lot going on in the space at the moment.
Yes.
There's still a lot going on, and when we talk about, I know what you're saying, that every time we get to a level, somebody will come along and write this abstraction layer that kind of takes all that complexity and then makes it really simple.
Yep.
And then that'll go on for a few years, and then all of a sudden that really simple thing then becomes a deeper abstraction layer. And I sit down and watch these things, and it's almost like I can't help but think in my mind is like, right, I relate it to, I guess because I've got history in the IT industry, right? What we're talking about now is what was done, like you say. Some of these concepts and terminologies aren't necessarily net new, things because of cloud. We're just using old ideas, but trying to formulate them in a way that meets business problems. And that's the thing that makes a certain technology stack successful or not, is that if it's easy to use, it's easy for developers or ops people to use to solve real world problems. I mean, having said that, Robert, I mean, where do you see, again, it's probably a massively broad question, but this point where you hear, right, cloud native Kubernetes containerization Helm charts and Kubernetes clusters versus traditional VM, traditional, when I say traditional, infrastructure as a service, I guess in the cloud term. Where do you see that bun fight, so to speak? Because clearly there's not this one size fits all. How do you see that kind of working out between that kind of traditional developer versus traditional operations person?
So the way that I see it, we need them all. We basically need every single aspect of what we have at the moment, because it really depends. And I said that so many times, I think people start quoting on it. We work in an industry of it depends. If you ask me a question, the only answer I can give sometimes is it depends. If I work on just high-level software, like I'm creating a service and it has a front end, it has a back end, or potentially many microservices, who knows? When I work on that, I want to care about the code and the business logic. I don't really want to care what was lying underneath. That's why we started getting things like serverless. But serverless is basically just a service, which is a self-service service running on some sort of infrastructure or some sort of platform. That platform might be Kubernetes. So for me, that's kind of the layer where I'm at. I'm creating stuff with Kubernetes. Kubernetes is my base, and then I build services on top of that, and then other people consume those services. That Kubernetes cluster is running on, since I'm using AKS, on virtual machine scale sets, which are VMs. And for someone at Microsoft who created this service, they need to care about the VMs and how that works, and the automation on like deploying new node pools and stuff like that. And they can do their job because someone who has the responsibility for the data center infrastructure again created a service for them, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of depends on where you're at and what you want to focus on and what you're doing. The normal developer who are creating, for instance, like websites, like a web service, a SaaS solution running on the web service, as a web service, most of them really don't care about the infrastructure. They just want to here's my code, you make it work. And those people rely on someone like me who creates the service which they run things on and make sure that everything runs smoothly and things like that. And what used to be DevOps, which also kind of is SRE from a Google perspective, it's the same thing, just different priorities, so to speak. But the traditional IT ops person, I think, probably doesn't exist in not that many years. The way that I see it, someone needs, if you have someone developing something, you have developers, they focus on the business logic, they create the service or application or whatever you want to call it. And then you have a couple of people who are kind of like the DevOps, call it DevOps engineer. I don't like using DevOps as a title because it's not a title thing, but a cloud engineer, let's say. They are doing the automation, they are doing the infrastructure and things like that, and they are still necessary, but I don't think they should be on a different team. And IT companies shouldn't have IT ops, and we actually do, which is kind of funny. We shouldn't have an IT ops, and then you have the developers, and because then you have all these silos. It should be a product team which have IT ops people, it has developers, it has security people, and everything in line in that one team. And since everyone kind of are autonomous teams, which is the only way you can get that is actually having people that know the entire delivery process. They all then start cooperating on how do we deliver it, and what approach, what tooling, is there common toolings that we need? All right, cool, we need to create these, we can buy this, we can get this for it because it's open source, and you kind of start forming the community aspect of it. And that's what we see happening in a lot of successful companies, where they start having that inner source mentality, which is taken obviously from open source, because in open source you can't just sit there and say like, all right, I'll ask this guy to flip this switch over here. Like you need to actually cooperate, because or else it doesn't move forward. And sharing code and sharing IDs and everything like that, all those aspects of open source are now becoming part of the inner source movement in companies. And at that point, I don't think there is an IT ops. Like normal system operations aren't a thing. It's people helping developers doing what they do, and they usually do it with similar tooling.
It very much seems, doesn't it? There is this, I guess it's a transition to a new way of working. For a lot of people that are in the industry, look, we've all got to keep up to speed with our learnings and where we're going, and keep up with the industry itself. Otherwise, you stand still and you become stagnant, and you're not offering any real service, I guess. So
if you don't do infrastructure as code now, for instance, you should be lucky to have the job that you have, because if you're trying to change jobs, people are going to probably ask, so infrastructure as code. We don't operate infrastructure manually. That's not.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's definitely going that way. I mean, and then you hear a big cohort of people, because look, let's face it. I guess the one thing I'm very mindful of, or try to be mindful of, is that I've worked with cloud for the last 10 to 12 years, I guess. In using that big overarching buzzword of cloud, but when it comes to that infrastructure and that traditional on-premise kit tin, and we know that there's still a lot of that out there in the industry. There's a lot of businesses that aren't kind of swallowing the blue pill from Microsoft and drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But I think it probably is fair to say that we can see the cadence of innovation and the way that things are going. It's not going to be, back to your point there about if people are working in the industry and they're I don't know, for whatever reason, not understanding or not learning some of these new concepts, then that's fine. We're not. I guess there's never a chance where you say no, you have to definitely, otherwise you're going to be out of a job. But I understand where that comes from, because clearly there will always be a job for somebody if their job is solely about managing a private cloud solution that doesn't have any interaction with public cloud or infrastructure as code. Absolutely, but I think. Generally, there's a lot of cadence going towards these technologies, isn't there?
At some point, it's all about kind of what's like the industry standard, and that industry standard gets moved all the time. And you could work at a company who are doing things like you did 10 or 15 years ago, but if you do. And if you don't move away from that yourself and start learning about these things, at the point where you kind of need a new job, what are the chances of you finding somewhere who is working based on 15-year-old technology and things like that? And that's kind of like I think the great things about being in IT, and also kind of one of the harder things to deal with in IT, is that I talk to people who have a lot of experience in IT, like over 20 years, and they all of a sudden didn't have a job, and all of a sudden they couldn't get a job. They actually didn't get jobs, and it's like, but I have so many years of experience, and I'm like, what's the last certification you did? It's like 10 plus years ago on a thing that no one uses. It's like, but that's actually not something people want. People don't want that. So like, how can you need to sell yourself? And the way that we do things in IT is continuous learning. You need to always be on, or else you have to catch up at some point.
100% agree. And look, this is a fine point, I think, to transition to the final question and the final topic area. Briefly, we talked around some fantastic areas, Robert. So firstly, thanks for being such an awesome guest. But when it comes to that constant learning, my last question to you is, why are we doing all this? What's your viewpoint? Where are we going? So I guess the question is, what's your next big bet for technology over the next 5 to 10 years?
Good question. And it's really hard to say without starting talking about stuff like AI and machine learning, which is something that for some people feels like, oh, it's a buzzword, but that for some people it's actually a real thing that is happening already. Crayon deliver AI solutions to a lot of people. We have a really good AI crew that do a lot of good work there. But like I keep on referencing like Star Trek, where like the future, that's kind of like the future. That's not like that's actually future. There's no need to actually, you don't get paid because your work is rewarding. Whatever you want to do, you do. You don't have like money in itself. That's not a thing because food just get replicated. Like that's a future. You're space traveling. That's my thing. I just do that. I just keep on.
That's where we're headed. I like that. You can leave that answer there, Robert. I'm with you.
But like I think it's like it needs to be the. I don't know if I talked about this public or if it was like at a bar, but it needs to be like the perfect storm, right? It needs to be quantum computers. It needs to be generalized AI to control those quantum computers, because you can't, like as a person, you can't sit there like going like right click here, and now you quantumize something. That doesn't work. So you need AI that we tell this is what we want to do. This is what we want to achieve. And at that point, you are kind of in Star Trek. You're going like, computer, do this task which is impossible to understand. And it's going to go, all right, yeah, cool. Yeah, here it is. Here's the results. So you need kind of that perfect storm. And I think we're closing in. Like my laptop, which I'm sitting on now, has neural cores for doing machine learning on the machine itself. It's just part of the machine. I didn't order that. I wanted a laptop, and I'm getting the building blocks for doing machine learning on my laptop to do low level tasks of steering like power stuff and things like. And we kind of started getting there. Everything that's happening, we're getting there. So I'm just waiting for like that we go over the edge, and all of a sudden we are in the future. And that
I don't know about you. Sometimes I sit back and I go, wow, who'd have thought 20 years ago we've got this thing now. 20 years ago we thought it was on Star Trek, and this thing that you stare at on your desk that you can now speak to and see a picture from anywhere in the world. It's like now we have it and it's taken for granted. So
my dad, who would have been 85 years old this year, he used to say like several years ago, like just ask Robert, because he has that phone thing. Everything's on there.
Yeah.
It's like because he couldn't fathom the fact there's something called the internet. He understood that it was there, but he couldn't understand actually how it works. And for him, that was like magic. It's like, when did that happen? Go check that. He's like, it's in 1926. So, how did you know that so fast? He's like, it doesn't. So,
but isn't that the word, Rob? Isn't that the word that kind of keeps us all going? Is that word? It's like magic, Isn't that what we all aspire to kind of deliver in our day jobs?
Yeah. Technology, really good technology is indistinguishable from magic. That's a quote from someone. I can't remember who.
No, absolutely. Robert, look, it's been fascinating to speak to you. Thanks so much for being an awesome guest and coming on and saying hello. We've covered some really important topics. All it leaves me to say is thank you for being on the show. Are there any last parting words of wisdom you want to impart, and we'll call an end?
Oh, wisdom. Just be good to each other. And obviously, if there's thing, and I usually say this about technical things, but when it comes to stuff like ADHD and everything like that, just reach out if anyone wants to talk about something. I have more points of view and my experiences, but I like to be helpful. So
absolutely.
That's about it.
Thank you for being an awesome guest, and thank you for being so candid about these important topics, Robert. And look, thank you for coming on, and no doubt we'll catch up over the social medias fairly soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Thanks, Robert. See you soon.
Bye.